visa franchise. Really excited to have on Emre Ozgu, managing partner at Barst LLP. Barst LLP is the oldest law firm that's exclusively focused on immigration law. So in our conversation today, we're going to be talking about pretty big recent update on U.S. immigration. Emery's going to go over that, as well as what the E2 visa is, what the EB2 National Interest Waiver green card is, what the process for both those categories are, and go over any questions that most common questions. Also, if you have questions, just type it in the comment box. And then towards the end, I'm going to talk about some of the franchise specific examples as well as industries that might be well suited for someone looking to apply for the E2 and or the EB2 NIW. So Emery, let's just kick it off. Like, can you tell us a little bit about U.S. immigration in 2021, and I hope we're kind of on the tail end of this pandemic, and hopefully give us some good news.
Yes, there finally are. It's incremental, it's slow, but the good news is coming out. It's been a tough 18 months, almost 20, almost 2 years. And really, the COVID situation and not necessarily the COVID situation in the United States, but the COVID situation in a lot of countries where U.S. consulates and embassies are, has really created sort of a gridlock, and created all types of barriers to people be applying for visas and being able to travel internationally and enter the United States. Well, slowly that, we've been getting good news on that. And just a few, within the last few days, they've made the announcement official that they were going to sort of make the COVID-related travel restrictions uniform and reduce it down to vaccination and negative testing, and not require people from different geographic areas to apply for waivers to get around the bans to their entry. And as soon as that announcement was made, you're seeing consulates and embassies around the world opening up visa appointments because there really are no COVID-related barriers standing in the way of allowing people to travel to the United States outside of the vaccination. Which is good news. It's been tough for people here or outside of the United States not to be able to have access to the consulates and embassies. And so this is all very welcome news, and hopefully will translate in the near future into people be able to get visa appointments at a much earlier date. I mean, you got some consulates that were issuing visa appointments for 2023. Right. So it's been positive on that front. And then here locally, like domestically, we're also just seeing things improve. The quality of service that we get, and the turnaround time and the processing times for some of the applications have started to drift back towards pre-COVID durations. We're not there yet, not by any stretch of the imagination, but we're getting it's improving. So it's good. It feels like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We see the light. We're almost there. It'll be interesting to see what happens after the holidays. The holidays are traditionally a slow time anyway. A lot of the posts and consulates are shut down, or there's very, very limited visa appointments made available anyway. So, we're almost in November. I'm curious to see what January looks like. I'm hoping that 2022 is a return to some sort of sense of normalcy with respect to people being able to apply for visas, get their appointments, have the visas issued, the passports returned, and being able to travel. It's been challenging, to say the least, for nearly 2 years.
It seems like it's all over the place. Like from our clients, Mexico, Chileans, and able to get their visa appointments relatively quickly, at least for the E2 investor visa. But then we have clients in Canada, Brazil that were waiting to get their E2 visa, and they had an appointment and it just kept getting further delayed, further delayed. It looks like finally now it's sticking. And then our clients that are going to interviews in November, they haven't changed.
Right, they have had their appointments canceled. Yeah, that phenomenon is soul crushing when a person gets an appointment scheduled and then like a week before they were canceling it, which was fairly common. So it was really hard to advise someone with confidence that, you know what, you should pick up, leave, go outside of the country to apply to this visa appointment. They're going to honor it. You're going to get your visa and you're going to be able to return within a reasonable amount of time. And you know, once the cancellation started, it really became difficult to say that. And so I'm hoping that you're right. I'm hoping that they keep their appointments. And beyond that, the people that I have had that have been able to get into the appointments, the turnaround on the passports with the visas endorsed is also an issue. Right. So I don't know.
What would that be? Usually like a week to get the passport back?
Yeah, it'd be like 5 business days. And it's, you know, it's 2, 3, 4 weeks. In some instances, my L visa clients have not gotten their visas yet, and it's been over a month. So I'm hoping that this announcement and sort of refocusing of their efforts in terms of COVID and how to limit the exposure that we have from people traveling into the country will translate into people having an easier time to apply for visas when they're eligible, when they're entitled, when they've had something approved.
How does it work at the consul level? Because like we had a recent client that they weren't going to get their B1, B2 visitor visa appointment for like 1.5 years. So they were advised to seek the E2 visa because they get their appointment in like 2 months. Right. Do you see there being kind of a split between certain visa categories and just being processed faster than others?
Absolutely. Like I would, and a good example of that would be the student visas over the summer, because students need to come and start school. Their semester start at the end of August, beginning of September. Student visas were prioritized basically starting in July. And most of them, right, because they needed big money. They needed to be able to get their visas and come and start school. And since early September, it feels like they finished those F1s, and now they started opening up to other employment-based visa categories. I would still say that tourist visas are at the lower end of the priority list. But on the topic of e-visas, you know, this predates COVID. You know, going back to Trump and all the shenanigans that you know, he tried to pull in terms of limiting who could come here. E-visas were always, E2 visas, e-visas in general, were always sort of you know, left alone. And it's because they're part of treaties, and it's not that easy. It's not with a waving of a wand or a signature, something that he can do or could do very easily. So there was never at any point an issue with e-visas being issued or people being eligible to file for them. It was really just COVID and the COVID-related restrictions that sort of has slowed that down. And so, you know, I've always been a very big fan of e-visas. You know, I think for a number of reasons, e-visa holders are treated with a little bit more respect, dignity, hands off. They're job creators. They're not job takers. And you know, you see that with the way that the visa application process is set up, the amount of time that some people get, you wouldn't get normally with most other visas. I mean, to get a 5-year employment-based visa is unheard of. And so I tell people, you know, I think there's a lot of value with e-visas, and it depends on which country we're talking about. You know,
sure. Last time we checked, there's over 75 different.
75. Okay, I usually say around 60. Right, you know, it's just sort of a day-to-day type of thing. But yeah, I mean, I still think that it's your best bang for your buck for a lot of people who have an entrepreneurial spirit, and then for also a lot of multinational companies that want to import their corporate culture from their home country. It's been useful, and it's efficient, cost-effective, and you know, has a lot of the benefits of, say, like an L2 visa where the spouse gets work authorization. And so I still see a lot of interest for E2s. Right,
And
the
for
United
those that
States is
aren't
still,
so familiar with the E2 visa, there's the management visa. It could be someone that's being transferred by a huge multinational, maybe like a Japanese bank or German manufacturer. And then you have the investor visa category, where I guess you can invest in a startup, buy an existing business, invest in a franchise. Emery, could you just give a little bit more information on the E2, kind of what the requirements are, and then kind of what the
sure,
process is for someone that wants that visa category?
absolutely. And I probably have a half a dozen of them on my desk right now. The E2 visa, whether you're from one of these 75 countries, requires that there's a U.S.-based corporate entity that's owned in majority from nationals from that country. Whether it's the investor themselves, and that's usually the case, that's requirement number one. Then they want to see that a substantial investment was made in that business by nationals from that treaty country. And I've been doing this 24 years now. The definition of what substantial investment is or means now has changed dramatically as our economy has changed, as our technology has changed. A lot of businesses just don't require that kind of capitalization like they used to. So it can be challenging finding, getting to a point where a business is going to require an investment that's going to satisfy a consular officer. The consular officers are still working off of, let's say, an early 2000s mentality in terms of every business requiring a 12-month lease of a traditional office, for example. The WeWorks, the Regis, the shared office spaces created a lot of challenges for us, and it took us a while to figure out sort of how to overcome that. Traditionally, E2 investor visa businesses, the ones that work the best are your brick and mortar, retail, manufacturing, something where a heavy workforce, payroll. The investment needs to be money that's spent that you can't recoup. So, the question that I get most often is, well, how about I set up a company and we buy a house through that company? Will that suffice? No. Because you can sell the property and recoup the investment funds. That same type of logic and thinking goes to like inventory. So I typically tell clients that it's got to be like straight up expenses on money that you can't recoup. So like rent, payroll, advertising costs. And to me, I still use the $150,000 mark as a sort of a safe zone. I'm in New York. It's not the same in every geographic area. Obviously, the cost could be lower outside of New York to set up a business, and I'm sure people could be successful with a lower amount. But I feel like it's got to be approaching that $100,000 mark at the very least to feel comfortable moving ahead. And the EVs is nice in that there's no set limit on the number of years that you can have it. It doesn't have the type of wage restrictions that H1s have. It can be a standalone business, unlike Ls. It provides for spousal work authorization, like L2s. Children under the age of 21 are allowed to accompany their parents. And the investor or the visa holder themselves don't have to spend any specific amount of time in the United States working at a specific geographic location. It's not as rigid as the other visa categories. And so I'm a big fan. The issue that you see with a lot of e-visa holders, or a question that comes up a lot, misconception or misunderstanding, is that there's no sort of segue from an E2 visa to a green card. And that's because 2 of the 5 employment-based visa green card categories require that there be a testing of the labor market. And so if you have an ownership interest in the business, or someone in your family does, they just don't believe that you'll do that in good faith. And so if you have an ownership interest in the company, you're disqualified. And so somehow that was spun, and it's the question that comes up inevitably in every e-visa consultation. It's limited to those two categories. There are other categories that you can still use the business or self-petition to get a green card. So having an e-visa is by no means a blanket prohibition about applying for a permanent residence based on employment. I can't hear you, Patrick.
I'm on mute.
Sorry.
It seems like the E2 visa could be a good visa to have for whether it's a year, 2 years, 5 years. And we've had clients in the past, you know, we haven't been doing this as long as you, over 25 years, but we've had clients that have lived in the US for 3 years, then went back to Europe or went back to South America. And had they decide to go the green card path from day one, there would have been some pretty big tax implications, and they would have had to restructure all their corporate assets.
Sure. Yes, that's a nice upside, or it's something that obviously plays into the decision making with clients. But I'll leave that to CPAs and tax specialists, because it's not just about having a green card in terms of becoming a permanent resident for taxation purposes, right? I mean, you can be here on a work visa, but after a certain period of time, after a certain number of years, you'll be taxed like a permanent resident. That's all I'll say about that. Yeah. You know, taxation is not my specialty, and I would definitely say if that's a primary concern, that the client would need tax counsel and immigration counsel at the same time.
And then, so imagine someone that is entering the US on the E2 visa. They're here, they want to do the green card option. You mentioned there are options to self-petition, one of which is partly the title of this conversation today, the EB2 NIW. Could you just give a little background on that visa category and who could be a good fit for that, and kind of how the process is for the EB2 NIW? Sure.
So EB2 is actually one of the two categories that I was talking, where normally there is a period or a requirement that the sponsoring employer try to recruit a U.S. worker. With these NIW cases, that's taken out. But for that to be taken out, you need to prove that there's substantial merit and importance to what the person is doing or can bring to the United States that sort of outweighs the need to try to protect the U.S. workforce and then have that recruitment requirement part of the process. So with the EB2 NIW, it's really for people who are working in areas where there can be a significant benefit to the U.S. as a whole, that the person has the capability of doing it, the credentials of doing it, the experience to do it. And so I would say, you know, I was looking up recently, like a lot of businesses and sectors and industries that are affected by COVID right now are sort of du jour with the EB2 NIW category. So healthcare, technology, anything supply chain related. If the person has a significant amount of experience, accomplishments, credentials, an advanced degree, they can find 5 to 10 people who will write reference letters on their behalf, supporting the fact that they are exceptional at what they do. They'll be in a position to self-petition under this category and skip that entire recruitment phase, which will save at least a year, probably. I mean, the processing times for an EB2 NIW case right now, the I-140 are probably about 8 months. And if you were to add back in the whole perm filing recruitment process to that, at a minimum, they're saving a year. And so for people who are entrepreneurs, have E2 visas, working in the industries or sectors where there's a benefit to the nation as a whole, it's definitely an option. A lot of people have been pursuing it recently. I think if there's a way right now that you can tie what you do into COVID and the effects that COVID's had on our economy, it ups your chances. there are other ways that a person can self-petition as an E2. Sometimes E2s will organically morph into an EB5, where the investor has just gone out of pocket more and invested from the initial amount, $100,000, $200,000, to $500,000 to $1 million, and it now employs 10 people. So that would be a way that you could self-petition using that entity. But I found that most E2 companies don't ever really get to that point. I've only had maybe a handful of people who have organically gone from E2 to EB5. More often than not, it's this EB2 NIW. So the business
for the EB5, I mean, every time they would have to take out the dividends, pay taxes on that, reinvest cash, that's already you can't just be reinvesting and have that.
Yeah, and it's just some of these businesses just don't lend themselves to that kind of capitalization.
You don't need,
right?
you don't need 10 full-time jobs, and I know there's some businesses, like especially in healthcare, where even getting to the 500K mark's tough because it only costs 200K to start. So then you have to get clever on how you're, using that money for working capital and staffing, which could be possible, but it might be easier just doing the EB2 NIW where processing times are faster right now.
You're reading my mind. I never want to tell clients to do something with their money for an immigration strategy. I would rather they focus on making the business successful. Right. So, a lot of these businesses just don't ever get to a point unless they expand and the person does really well and they acquire new entities or something that they would get to that $1 million mark. So it's just a tough reach.
So talking about some of the industries like you see, and for those that are listening on the podcast, I have a screen on vettedbiz.com, our platform of businesses and franchises for sale. But items, type of industries like IT, cleaning and maintenance. Then down here we have healthcare.
Healthcare, very big.
Okay.
Healthcare is very big. Technology, supply chain management, even finance and business advisory. If it's related to helping COVID, businesses that have been hit hard by COVID, trying to help them sort of pull out of it. That is what sort of what people are trying to do, right? Because it's the most, it's what everyone can relate to, what we're all going through, suffering as a whole. And so if you have something that can alleviate that, some sort of problem related to the business and the economy as a whole across the country, then you have a chance at an EB2 NIW.
We have some questions, Emery, mostly related to the E2 visa. Would buying a storage facility count for the E2 visa?
No, well, I don't want to say no without knowing more, but just based on that statement, I don't think it'll work. I would say no, because like I said, in some countries, the treaty calls for a 5-year e-visa. So is a consular officer going to give someone a 5-year visa based on just the acquisition of a facility that once they come to the United States, they can turn around and sell? I mean, I always just try to think of the consular officer who's about to grant this discretionary benefit. I don't know. I wouldn't do it. I mean, it just seems like there's not enough of a commitment from the investor. So I'm not saying that business wouldn't work. I just wouldn't have the application rest, or I wouldn't put too much weight on that part of the investment. I would use other things like payroll and other costs that the person has incurred in that process.
And another question: if I buy a brick and mortar mini Korean groceries in New Jersey, would that count as an E2 investment?
Potentially, yes. We have a lot of clients in similar situations, small business owners. That works. Yeah.
And then John had a question: if I'm approved for an E2 visa, will my dependents, in parentheses, children, be able to attend a university as in-state or an international student? I read in some schools they require at least 1 year residency.
That's a state-to-state issue. Each state and their state school, university system, unfortunately. So it's just super complicated, has their own set of rules. So I can't give a uniform answer to that.
Well said. And then a question in terms of like change of status. Can we enter the States on a visitor's visa, then switch to an E2 once we have found a business to invest in?
Okay, so when a person's issued a B visa, it's not just a B2 tourist visa, it's a B1/B2 visa. The B1 portion is for temporary business travelers, people coming to conferences, trade shows, to meet with existing clients, sometimes to come train U.S. workforce on how to use a machine, install a machine, and then also to do your due diligence on a potential investment that you're going to make in the United States. So absolutely, I have clients use their B1 visas to come to the United States, stay here, usually for the six to 9 months leading up to us filing the E2 visa application, because they're doing they're meeting with their accountants, their lawyers, their real estate brokers. They're serious business people looking to make this a worthwhile investment, and that takes some time. And the B1 visa category is specifically designed for that. Now, you have to be careful once the business is up and running and operational. That's usually what the CBP officers at the airport will use as the barometer for when a person needs to then apply for an E visa. I'll sometimes arm my clients with a letter from our law firm saying, they're entering on the B1 visa, they intend on applying for an E visa, or they're not anywhere ready, or we're not at that stage yet. But they know the rules, and this is a short trip. They're only here for 2 to 3 weeks. Give them their itinerary, where they're going to be staying, that they won't be working in the United States. And if and when they've ever had to present that, the officers then know that this person is a serious business person. This is a real investment that they intend on making or hope to make. And it's usually not a problem traveling in and out on the B1.
All right. Thanks for that, Emre. A question
Actually, but getting to the question itself.
Sure.
Changing status from B2 to E. Yes, you can do it. I'm not a fan. Most consular officers, if you do that, when that doesn't entitle you to entitle you to travel internationally. That just entitles you to stay and live and work in the United States for 2 years. When you do need to travel, you need to apply for a visa. When you go back to your consulate or your home country and you apply for that E visa, the consular officers usually don't like that people come on B2s and then change to another status. They would prefer that they would go the suggested route of applying directly for the E visa at the consulate and post, and that's where E visas are different. You don't need to file anything here in the United States. You file directly at the embassies and consulates. They have jurisdiction over E's, and so while you can do that here in the United States, ultimately it's up to the embassies and consulates to determine whether or not you're eligible for a visa. So I would rather just take one shot and do it at the embassy and consulate if I had my choice.
And then there's a question more directed to me. Can you share some franchise options on direct EB5? So just going on our platform Vetted Biz, I selected investments between 500K and 2 million, and you have 625 options. Now, which of these have 10 full-time jobs? Maybe half of them. Which ones are they going to be willing to operate the business on your behalf until you have legal status in the US? Very, very few. So you have the option to reach out directly to those franchises, or you can engage Visa Franchise and we'll do a proper search on your behalf and probably save you a lot of time and money there. Another question, just is a gym a good option? Generally, no. I'm not a big fan of fitness centers. One of our analysts just reviewed Orange Theory. The midpoint investment's 1.3 million. And we estimate that they make about 150K a year. So that's going to take you 10 or so years to recoup your initial capital investment. There's other big chains like F45, which have 1,000+ locations around the world, but their franchisor is making most of their money from selling franchises, the franchise fee, not from the actual royalty. So I'm not a big fan of gyms. I think there's a lot more profitable industries. And even industries that are better suited for those visa categories like the E2, EB2 NIW, such as healthcare, for example, with significantly higher margins and at times not as high of initial capital investment. Let's see. And then Cosme had a question. With 100K, can I get a good franchise? Which one do you recommend? It's really going to depend a lot on you. It's just, it's hard to say like, yes, this is a good franchise for everyone, because I don't know enough about you to determine based on your skill set, based on where you want to open up. 100K, there are great options, but to meet the substantiality requirement, depending on the type of franchise, depending where it is, you might have to supplement that investment to get close to the 150K mark. A question from Alejandro. Is it possible to come in a franchise with creation of a business for an E2, i.e. start a production agency and acquire a franchise that does real estate photography side of the business? I guess alluding to basically having a structure of a E2 visa business that does different things, not just that said franchise.
Yes, I have never done that before, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't, as long as you could show that it was going to translate into a profitable business, job creating, and it was going to even with that extra element that it was going to require the $150,000 capitalization. But yeah, I don't see why that wouldn't work.
And then another question from John. He said he watched another channel for the EB5 Direct Investment, that it's not required to be a 51% majority shareholder. Is that true? The
Yes.
requirement is to create 10 jobs, and if the economy goes bad and you lay those employees off after 10 months, did you satisfy the 10 jobs?
Well, all right. So you don't, for EB5, there is no specific amount of ownership interest that a person or a group of people from a certain nationality need to have. So you could own 5% of a business, but if you invest $1 million in that business and it translates into the creation of 10 full-time jobs for U.S. citizens or green card holders, that will suffice. So it doesn't have the same majority ownership interest requirement that e-visas all have. On the second part of the question, that's say tough question to answer specifically, because the EB5 green card process has multiple steps. The first green card that you're issued is conditional. It's only valid for 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, you need to file to make it permanent. And so if you don't have those 10 employees when you're filing to make that green card permanent, you're going to run into problems. And, you know, there's an entire division and department designated to EB5 alone in Washington, D.C. And I'm sure they're onto this. And when you file an EB5 case, they ask for quarterly payroll records to sort of verify and make sure that you're not gaming the system by having 10 employees when you file, and as soon as the receipt notice comes, you cut them. No, USCIS is much more sophisticated than that. So I'm not going to say that it's not possible, but it would probably take several years before you could get to that point where you didn't need the 10 employees.
All right. And then just wrapping up, just a couple more questions here. We'll take one more directed to Emre, and then one directed to myself on the franchise or business side. Juan had a question. Can you go from DACA to E2 visa?
No. Unfortunately. Right now. That could change.
And then from Isaac, what healthcare business do you suggest? Again, it's so, based on your background, if you have experience in the medical space, urgent care facilities are great, but they cost a lot of capital, close to $1 million or if not more. If you're really good with managing people,
underserved areas.
Sorry?
If you're looking to set up a business in an underserved area, a remote area where there aren't a lot of physicians, I'm sure that carries some weight as well. And maybe in some areas where
from the immigration side.
yeah, where there just aren't that many doctors, for whatever reason. That's a whole other. But yeah, I'd also say ventilators. I mean, I actually do have a couple of clients who are now in the business of ventilators, production of ventilators, and new technology with respect to that. And they were the first two. There were two different cases that I had filed that I didn't receive a request for additional evidence in months, and I don't think it's a coincidence.
Yeah, we've had clients in the past invest in home care businesses where you have anywhere from 20 to 40 employees, and it's a great low cost investment, right. $150K, and the sales there are some systems that do median sales of $600K at a pretty healthy profit margin. So there's quite a lot of healthcare related businesses. On the visa and immigration side, it's going to be more Emre advising on what makes the most sense for your immigration goals, and then myself and my team from Visa Franchise advising more on just, does this business make sense or not?
Right. I think healthcare in general as a whole is a good industry because it's capital intensive, right? There are some med tech businesses that just require a laptop and you're good to go, and you know, that's the issue that I face with a lot of industries now that are just so efficient, right? And easy to start and run. But for the most part, with healthcare, you still require human beings. So physical space to do it, hardware, equipment, technology, and those are all costs. Those, you know, that adds up really quickly. And so as a whole, I think it's still a pretty good industry to look at if you're looking for viable E2 industries.
Well, Emre, really appreciated having you on today. I always learn when we're chatting, and there's just so much change on the U.S. immigration front. And
yes,
we'll leave your contact information for those that are interested in setting up a consultation with yourself or one of your colleagues from Barst LLP. And also, anyone that registered to this live stream will also be sending a link to the video and audio, so you can go through any parts you might have missed. Again, Emre, thanks so much for joining.
It's always a pleasure. It's good to see you again.
Likewise. Thanks.
Have a good one.